There are wounds in life that do not bleed on the outside. No bruises, no broken bones, no evidence the world can easily see. But deep inside, there are people walking around carrying the pain of a childhood where love felt conditional, where emotions were dismissed, where safety was unpredictable, and where the very people who were supposed to guide them emotionally were still emotionally lost themselves. Some of you grew up in homes where your feelings were called too sensitive. Some of you were forced to become emotionally strong before you were even old enough to understand your own pain. Some of you learned to stay quiet because expressing yourself only led to criticism, guilt, anger, or rejection. And the hardest part? You may have spent years blaming yourself for wounds that were never your fault. An emotionally immature parent may have provided food, shelter, education, or discipline, but still failed to provide emotional security. And when a child grows up without emotional support, emotional safety, they often become adults who constantly question their worth. They apologize too much. They overthink every conversation. They become people pleasers. They fear abandonment. They chase validation. They feel guilty for setting boundaries. And deep down, they carry the exhausting belief that they must earn love. But hear this clearly. A child should never have had to earn what should have been freely given. You were not difficult for wanting affection. You were not weak for needing comfort. You were not too emotional for wanting to be understood. You were simply human. Emotionally immature parents often make their children responsible for emotions they never learned to manage themselves. Instead of protecting the child emotionally, they place emotional pressure on the child. The child becomes the peacekeeper, the therapist, the invisible one, or the achiever trying desperately to gain approval. And eventually, that child grows into an adult who feels emotionally exhausted without understanding why. Because unresolved childhood pain does not disappear with age. It follows you into relationships, into friendships, into marriage, into your confidence, into your self-worth, into the way you speak to yourself when nobody is around. But healing begins the moment you stop normalizing what hurt you. Healing begins when you finally admit, yes, I was emotionally neglected. Yes, I deserved better communication. Yes, I deserved patience, understanding, and emotional stability. Acknowledging the wound is not disrespect, it is honesty. And honesty is where freedom begins. Some people are waiting for an apology they may never receive. That is one of the most painful truths of healing. Emotionally immature people rarely take full accountability because accountability requires emotional depth, self-awareness, humility, and reflection. And many parents never healed from their own wounds before raising children. This does not excuse the damage, but it explains the cycle. Hurt people often raise wounded children when healing never takes place, and this is where your transformation begins. Because healing is not about becoming bitter. Healing is about becoming aware. You do not heal by hating them. You heal by refusing to become them. That is true emotional maturity. You break generational cycles when you learn how to communicate with kindness instead of manipulation. When you stop using silence as punishment. When you become emotionally available. When you learn to listen instead of control. When you allow people to feel safe around your presence. Many people grew up in homes where love came with fear. And now, as adults, peace feels unfamiliar. Chaos feels normal. Emotional distance feels familiar. And healthy love feels suspicious because the nervous system became addicted to survival mode. But healing teaches you something powerful. You no longer have to survive every relationship. You can finally learn to live. You can learn that boundaries are not selfish. Boundaries are wisdom. You can love people and still protect your peace. You can forgive someone and still limit their access to your life. You can honor your parents without sacrificing your emotional well-being. And some of you need to hear this. Stopping the cycle may make you the most misunderstood person in your family. Because when one person begins healing, unhealthy patterns become uncomfortable. The family system often resists change because dysfunction became normal. But do not confuse resistance with failure. Growth will always challenge environments built on denial. There comes a moment in healing where you stop asking, "Why weren't they the parent I needed?" And you begin asking, "How do I become the person I needed?" That question changes everything. Because now your energy shifts from blame to rebuilding. You begin reparenting yourself. You speak to yourself with patience instead of cruelty. You allow yourself to rest without guilt. You stop abandoning your own needs to please everyone else. You learn emotional regulation. You become more self-aware. You become softer without becoming weak. That is healing. Healing is not pretending the pain never existed. Healing is carrying the wisdom without carrying the destruction. And listen carefully. Your past may explain you, but it does not have to define you. You are not destined to repeat every pattern you witnessed. You are not permanently damaged because you lacked emotional guidance. You are not too broken to experience healthy love. In fact, some of the strongest people in this world are those who had to teach themselves the emotional lessons they should have learned in childhood. People who heal become deeply compassionate, deeply self-aware, deeply intentional, because they know what pain feels like, and they refuse to spread it further. One day, you will realize something beautiful. The healing journey was never just about recovering from your parents. It was about discovering yourself, the version of you beneath the fear, beneath the guilt, beneath the survival mode, beneath the constant need for approval. There is a peaceful, worthy, emotionally whole person inside of you who has been waiting to breathe freely. And the moment you stop chasing love from emotionally unavailable people, you finally create space to give love to yourself. That changes everything. So if you are healing from an emotionally immature parent, be patient with yourself. Some wounds took years to form. Healing will take time too. But every boundary you set, every unhealthy pattern you break, every moment you choose self-respect over self-abandonment, every time you speak kindly to yourself, every step you take toward emotional freedom, you are becoming the miracle your childhood needed. And that is not weakness. That is power. Many people grow up believing that emotional immaturity only means yelling, anger, or obvious toxicity behavior. But emotional immaturity is often much quieter and harder to recognize, especially when it comes from a parent. Some parents may provide food, clothing, education, and financial support, yet still leave deep emotional wounds because they never learned how to connect emotionally in a healthy and mature way. A child raised in this environment often feels confused because their pain does not always look dramatic from the outside. They may think, maybe I'm overreacting, or maybe my childhood wasn't that bad. But emotional neglect can hurt just as deeply as visible abuse. An emotionally immature parent struggles to regulate their emotions, take accountability, communicate with empathy, or create emotional safety. Instead of guiding the child calmly, they react impulsively, make everything about themselves, or dismiss the child's feelings. When the child cries, they may hear things like, "Stop being sensitive, you're too emotional," or "You're making a big deal out of nothing." Over time, the child learns that their emotions are inconvenient. Instead of expressing feelings openly, they begin suppressing them to avoid conflict, rejection, or criticism. Some emotionally immature parents use guilt and manipulation rather than understanding and communication. They may expect the child to emotionally care for them instead of acting like the responsible adult. In many homes, the child becomes the peacemaker, constantly trying to prevent arguments or emotional explosions. This creates anxiety because the child never knows what emotional version of the parent they will face. One day there is affection, the next day coldness or anger. That inconsistency damages emotional trust. Emotionally immature parents also struggle with accountability. Rather than apologizing, they deny, deflect, blame others, or make the child feel guilty for speaking up. This often creates adults who question their own memories, feelings, and instincts. They become people pleasers because, they were taught that keeping others happy mattered more than being emotionally healthy themselves. Understanding emotional immaturity is powerful because it helps people finally realize that the problem was never their worth. The issue was that the parent lacked the emotional tools necessary to provide consistent love, empathy, validation, and security. Recognizing this truth becomes the beginning of healing because awareness breaks confusion. When people finally understand the environment they grew up in, they stop blaming themselves for wounds they did not create. One of the deepest wounds caused by emotionally immature parents is the burden of guilt and self-blame that children carry into adulthood. Many children grow up believing they were the problem simply because the adults around them never took responsibility for their own emotional behavior. When a parent constantly criticizes, ignores, dismisses, or manipulates a child, the child naturally begins asking, "What is wrong with me?" Instead of recognizing the parent's emotional limitations, they internalize the pain and turn it against themselves. Children are not born hating themselves. They learn self-doubt through repeated emotional experiences. When a child's emotions are mocked, ignored, or treated like an inconvenience, they slowly begin believing their feelings do not matter. They stop trusting themselves. They become hyper-aware of other people's moods while disconnecting from their own emotional needs. This creates adults who apologize excessively, fear disappointing others, and feel responsible for everyone's happiness. Many people raised by emotionally immature parents become trapped in a cycle of constantly trying to earn love and approval. They overachieve, overgive, and overextend themselves, hoping that one day they will finally feel emotionally accepted. Some become perfectionists because they believe mistakes will lead to rejection. Others become caretakers, sacrificing their own peace to keep relationships functioning. Deep inside, they still carry the wounded belief that if they can just become good enough, they will finally receive the love they always needed. But healing begins when a person understands a painful truth. Children were never supposed to carry the emotional weight of their parents. A child should not have been responsible for managing adult emotions, preventing conflict, or earning affection through performance. The failure to provide emotional safety was not the child's fault. It was the result of emotional immaturity that existed long before the child was born. Releasing guilt is difficult because many people were conditioned to feel guilty for having needs, boundaries, or emotions. Even speaking honestly about childhood pain can feel like betrayal, but acknowledging the truth is not disrespectful. It is necessary for healing. You cannot heal wounds you keep pretending did not hurt. Breaking free from self-blame also means learning to separate your identity from the way you were treated. Just because someone failed to emotionally nurture you does not mean you were unworthy of love. Their inability to love maturely was a reflection of their emotional limitations, not your value. The moment you stop measuring your worth through the approval of emotionally unavailable people, you begin reclaiming your freedom, confidence, and emotional peace. One of the most life-changing parts of healing from an emotionally immature parent is learning how to reparent yourself. Many people grow up physically older but emotionally still carrying the unmet needs of the child they once were. They may look confident on the outside while internally struggling with insecurity, fear of rejection, emotional exhaustion, or a constant need for validation. This happens because the emotional guidance they needed during childhood was never fully provided. Reparenting yourself means becoming the safe, loving, emotionally mature presence you needed when you were younger. For many people, childhood was filled with criticism instead of encouragement, emotional distance instead of comfort, or unpredictability instead of safety. Because of this, they often develop an inner voice that sounds harsh, impatient, and unforgiving. They speak to themselves in ways they would never speak to someone they love. Every mistake becomes proof that they are not good enough. Every failure becomes a reason to attack themselves emotionally. Reparenting begins when you consciously change that inner voice from judgment to compassion. It means learning to comfort yourself instead of abandoning yourself emotionally. Instead of saying, "I'm weak for feeling this way," you begin saying, "My feelings matter and I deserve understanding." Instead of pushing yourself to exhaustion to prove your worth, you begin allowing yourself to rest without guilt. Slowly, you stop treating yourself like a machine designed only to survive and begin treating yourself like a human being, worthy of care. Reparenting also involves learning emotional skills that may never have been modeled in childhood. Many people raised by emotionally immature parents were never taught healthy communication, emotional regulation, or boundaries. They learned to suppress emotions, avoid conflict, or seek approval because those behaviors helped them survive emotionally unstable environments. But survival habits often become destructive in adulthood. Healing requires replacing those habits with healthier patterns built on self-awareness and emotional balance. Another important part of reparenting yourself is giving yourself permission to have needs. Children raised in emotionally immature homes often learned that their needs were burdensome or inconvenient. As adults, they may struggle to ask for help, express emotions, or prioritize themselves without feeling selfish. Reparenting teaches you that your needs are not weaknesses. They are part of being human. The beautiful thing about healing is that you do not have to remain emotionally trapped in the environment that shaped you. You may not have been given the love, patience, and emotional safety you deserved growing up, but you can begin giving those things to yourself now. And every time you choose self-respect, emotional awareness, compassion, and healthy boundaries, you slowly become the person your younger self always needed. Inside many adults who struggle with insecurity, fear of abandonment, emotional sensitivity, or difficulty trusting others, there is often a wounded inner child still carrying pain from years ago. Healing the inner child means recognizing that part of yourself that felt unseen, unheard, emotionally neglected, or unloved during childhood. Even though time has passed, emotional wounds do not automatically disappear. The child who once felt rejected or emotionally unsafe often continues living inside the adult mind, influencing relationships, reactions, fears, and self-worth. Children natra. All crave love, validation, safety, and emotional connection. When emotionally immature parents fail to provide these consistently, the child begins adapting in unhealthy ways to survive emotionally. Some children become overly quiet and withdrawn because they learn their feelings are unwelcome. Others become perfectionists, believing achievement will finally earn approval and affection. Some become caretakers, constantly prioritizing other people's emotions while ignoring their own needs. These coping mechanisms may help the child survive emotionally, but they often create deep struggles later in adulthood. The inner child carries memories not only of what happened, but also of what was missing. Sometimes the deepest pain comes from the absence of emotional warmth, encouragement, understanding, and protection. A child may have desperately wanted comfort during difficult moments, but instead received criticism, silence, anger, or emotional dismissal. Over time, the child begins believing, they are unworthy of love, or that expressing emotions is dangerous. Those beliefs become deeply rooted and continue affecting adult life. This is why certain situations can trigger intense emotional reactions that seem bigger than the moment itself. A small rejection may feel devastating. Criticism may feel unbearable. Emotional distance may create panic or anxiety. These reactions often come from old wounds being activated, not just the present situation. The inner child is still searching for the safety and reassurance they never fully received. Healing the inner child requires compassion, patience, and honesty. It means allowing yourself to acknowledge the pain instead of minimizing it. Many people were taught to ignore their emotions or just move on, but suppressed pain does not disappear. It quietly affects self-esteem, relationships, and emotional health until it is finally addressed. Part of healing is learning to give yourself what was missing. You begin speaking to yourself with kindness instead of shame. You stop invalidating your emotions. You create safer relationships. You allow yourself to rest, express feelings, and set boundaries without guilt. Most importantly, you stop blaming yourself for wounds created during a time when you were simply a child trying to feel loved and safe. As healing deepens, the inner child slowly begins to feel protected instead of abandoned. And for the first time, emotional peace no longer feels impossible. One of the hardest lessons people learn while healing from emotionally immature parents is that boundaries are necessary for emotional survival. Many people were raised to believe that saying no is disrespectful, that protecting their peace is selfish, or that enduring unhealthy behavior is part of love and loyalty. Because of this conditioning, they grow into adults who constantly sacrifice their emotional well-being to keep others comfortable. They tolerate disrespect, emotional manipulation, guilt, and draining behavior because they were taught to prioritize other people's feelings above their own mental and emotional health. Emotionally immature parents often react negatively when boundaries are introduced because boundaries challenge control, unhealthy patterns, and emotional dependency. A person who spent years having unlimited access to your emotions may suddenly accuse you of being selfish, cold, distant, or ungrateful when you begin protecting yourself. This can create intense guilt, especially for those who spent their childhood trying to earn approval and avoid conflict. But boundaries are not punishments. Boundaries are expressions of self-respect. Healing requires understanding that forgiveness and access are not the same thing. You can forgive someone without allowing them to continue harming your emotional health. Forgiveness is about freeing yourself from bitterness and emotional captivity, not giving unlimited permission for repeated toxic behavior. Many people stay trapped because they confuse love with self-sacrifice. Real love should not require the destruction of your peace, identity, or emotional stability. Setting boundaries may involve limiting certain conversations, refusing emotional manipulation, reducing contact, or no longer participating in unhealthy family dynamics. For some people, it means learning to stop explaining themselves constantly. Emotionally immature people often demand endless justification because they struggle to respect boundaries they do not personally benefit from. Healing teaches you that you do not need everyone's approval to protect your emotional well-being. At first, boundaries can feel uncomfortable because they go against survival habits developed in childhood. If you were raised in an environment where conflict felt dangerous or emotional needs were dismissed, standing up for yourself may trigger anxiety and fear. You may feel guilty simply for choosing yourself, but discomfort does not mean you are doing something wrong. Often it means you are breaking patterns that kept you emotionally trapped for years. Healthy boundaries also create space for emotional clarity. When you stop constantly absorbing unhealthy energy, you begin reconnecting with yourself. You think more clearly. You feel more emotionally stable. You stop living in constant survival mode. Most importantly, you begin realizing that protecting your peace is not selfish, it is necessary. You cannot heal in environments that continuously disrespect your emotions, ignore your needs, or make you feel emotionally unsafe. Boundaries are not walls built from hatred. They are doors built with wisdom, self-awareness, and emotional maturity. One of the most powerful parts of healing from emotionally immature parents is realizing that your pain does not have to become your identity. Many people spend years trapped in survival mode, carrying emotional wounds that shape the way they think, love, trust, and see themselves. But healing creates a turning point where suffering is no longer just something that hurt you, it becomes something that teaches you, strengthens you, and transforms you into a more emotionally aware human being. Pain can either continue the cycle or become the reason the cycle finally ends. People raised by emotionally immature parents often grow up witnessing unhealthy communication, emotional instability, avoidance, manipulation, criticism, or emotional neglect. Without healing, these patterns can unconsciously continue into future relationships, friendships, marriages, and even parenting. Hurt has a way of repeating itself when it is never addressed. But transformation begins when someone becomes self-aware enough to say, "This pain stops with me." That decision is powerful because breaking generational cycles requires courage. It means choosing emotional growth even when unhealthy behavior feels familiar. It means learning healthier ways to communicate instead of repeating the silence, anger, or population you experienced growing up. It means becoming emotionally available instead of emotionally avoidant. It means choosing understanding over control and accountability over denial. Many people who heal from emotionally immature environments become deeply compassionate because they know what emotional pain feels like. They become more patient with others, more intentional with their words, and more aware of how emotional wounds affect people. Their suffering gives them emotional depth. Instead of becoming bitter, they become wiser. Instead of spreading pain, they become committed to creating safety, peace, and emotional honesty in their relationships. Transformation also means recognizing your value beyond your past. Emotionally immature parents often make children feel invisible, unimportant, or emotionally burdensome. Healing teaches you that your worth was never determined by how poorly someone understood or treated you. Your value existed long before anyone failed to recognize it. Once you understand this, you stop chasing validation from emotionally unavailable people and begin building a stronger relationship with yourself. Pain also develops resilience. The people who had to teach themselves emotional awareness, self-respect, boundaries, and self-love often become incredibly strong because their growth was earned through struggle and reflection. Healing gives them wisdom that cannot be taught through comfort alone. Over time, your story changes. You are no longer just someone who survived emotional immaturity. You become someone who turned suffering into emotional intelligence, compassion, strength, and purpose. And sometimes the greatest victory is not proving your pain to others, is becoming the emotionally healthy person you once desperately needed yourself. Healing from an emotionally immature parent is not about living in anger or staying trapped in the past. It is about finally understanding your pain, reclaiming your voice, and becoming the emotionally healthy person you were always meant to be. The wounds may have shaped part of your story, but they do not have to define your future. Every boundary you set, every unhealthy pattern you break, and every moment you choose self-respect over self-abandonment is proof that healing is happening. You are not weak because you were hurt. You are powerful because you chose to heal instead of repeating the pain. And one day, you will realize that your greatest victory was not changing the people who hurt you, it was refusing to lose yourself because of them. Thank you all for listening. If this message touched your heart, carry it with you, and remember that healing is possible, no matter how deep the wound may be. Keep growing, keep choosing peace, and never forget that your emotional well-being matters. Your past may explain your pain, but it does not control your destiny. Thank you, and may your journey forward be filled with strength, wisdom, peace, and genuine self-love.